Yeah, thanks so much again for having me here. Thank you, Rasmus, for that awesome keynote opening us up. Yeah, so I'm Anne. Some of you may know me on the internet as the Happy Cat. Used to kind of post more content about like game programming, and that's how I originally got involved with Handmade like a few years ago. But lately, I've been in the industry for about maybe 5 years now, and I'm mainly doing cloud services, game services, most recently on Halo Infinite. And now I'm at a new gaming company in the Seattle area called Probably Monsters, which has been a really cool, fun, exciting time. But yeah, when Abner and I discussed doing a talk, I was like, I don't have much game programming, I don't have much low-level systems programming stuff to show. But we talked a bit about how it's not, like, a lot of this work is not just about the technical ideas. There's also, even as we were talking about, there's a very human, emotional component to doing this work. So, you know, my title is Low-Level Emotional Programming, which is sort of a joke to stay on brand, but also not. It really fits in. So anyway, you know, thank you in advance for bearing with me for something that's a bit different. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So, right off the bat, emotions, right? I guess right off the bat, is there anyone who can tell me just by looking at this what this is? Totally cool if not. You can shout it out. Sick logic gates, that's right. No. So this is a 4-bit ALU, which for those who may not be familiar with hardware architecture, that's just like a building block of computer hardware. And if you haven't spent any time studying computer architecture, well, for some of you, this might be totally your jam. You're like, I hope there's more of this. Spoiler alert, there's not, I'm sorry. But for those of you who have not studied computer architecture at all, very understandably, you might just be like, I have no idea what this is. I have no idea what's going on. This inspires fear and confusion. And this is more of a visual representation of, you know, imagine opening a code base for the first time. You work in this area. You work in, let's say for me, I'm really familiar with cloud stuff now, and then I open up like the Unreal source code and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? Or with the house metaphor we were talking about, it's kind of like, you know, you're hoping to enter a house and you're like, this is where I think the living room should be, and you're in like an Asherian nightmare maze or something. So just insert this, if architecture is your thing, I'm sure there's some other code base that you've opened up and you just get a mental block right away. Or maybe you're a beginner, I don't know, you just learned your first Python course and you're like, great, I'm ready to jump into making a game from scratch. And then inevitably you're gonna run into things where you're like, I don't know how to move forward, I don't know how to approach this, I'm inclined to kind of panic or give up and so on. So, you know, on the one hand, there's that like beginner case that this is super important for. There's like a really high barrier to entry. This stuff can be really intimidating. But also like as an experienced dev, you can get into your niche and your comfort zone. And sometimes like if we're gonna be talking about like, yeah, let's change paradigms of software engineering, like here's this whole new better performant way. Sometimes you don't have to sell someone on the technical idea. They're already on board that their stuff sucks and they need to improve it. Sometimes it's just a financial thing. It's like, yeah, we can't change everything. But a lot of times it's also just this like secret little emotional thing of like, but I don't want to do the thing that's different from what I've spent years and years practicing and getting to know. So those are the two angles that we're going to kind of talk about today. Like beginners, how to get over these humps, experienced people, same thing. It's just, it sucks to feel like a beginner all over again, right? So that's sort of what we're going to be talking about today. Yeah, so let's jump into this. So this is the Triune brain theory. It's from the 60s, and as I was researching it, I learned this is not really used for like medical diagnosis or anything like that. This is my disclaimer that I am not like a brain scientist. I haven't even been in the industry comparatively that long. So this is sort of my like, I am going to be telling some stories and some things that really helped me out, but If it resonates, great. If it doesn't, then great. So this is perfect for storytelling. That's my disclaimer. So what is this? This is just basically going through the tiers of evolutionary complexity in our brains. So you got your lizard brain, the autonomic nervous system of like fight or flight. You got your mammal brain, that's like what you'd have in common with, I don't know, your dog or cat, where you have some emotions and your memories. And then finally, we spend a lot of time in our human brain, where we have our language, our abstract thought, imagination, and so on. And so what do I mean when I'm talking about low-level emotions? Well, let's go through it. Let's go through, we have this mental block. Insert whatever this is for you. I have no idea what I'm doing with certain topic. And, you know, I guess one category is that you know, it would be ideal if you're like, I have no idea what's going on, but I sort of have this confidence that I can laugh it off, I can work through it. And yeah, if you have that level of confidence, like, congratulations, you've graduated from my talk. But I'm sure there's some people out there who are like, yeah, nothing with computers phases me, computers make so much sense. A lot of us, that's not true, but I'm sure if computers make total sense to you, I'm sure there's some other skill out there where you can get this hesitation, this mental block. So then usually this kind of shakes you a bit and it produces an emotion. Once again, it would be great if that emotion was the excitement of the journey you're about to go on and the things you're going to learn. But usually it's more like sadness, confusion, frustration, fear, overwhelmingness, more negative emotions. And once again, sometimes it can just stay there. You're like, I'm frustrated, gonna go take a walk, and it works itself out. But sometimes there's like this danger response. It goes a bit deeper. You feel like your stomach clench. You feel things going on in your body at a more like primal level. And this is just sitting at your desk, maybe like watching unit tests fail one by one or something like that. And it seems a bit silly, but especially if, you know, you have your job is your livelihood connected to your food and housing. You know, maybe you're in a college program for similar reasons. Maybe you're just, human brains love social identities and we're like, I'm the game programming person, and if I can't figure this out, I won't be that person. I'll look really silly. So, you know, there's lots of reasons where our brains can like make these abstract leaps that say, oh my gosh, the unit test failed, therefore danger. And we're not usually aware of this. This is very spontaneous. This is subconscious. And so this is what I mean by low-level emotions. This is what we're going to focus on today, that like unconscious feeling and why it's important to untangle that so we can move forward with some of these things that give us blocks. So we'll talk a little bit about what this is. The lizard brain, brainstem, the autonomic nervous system. So basically you've got your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems. So the first one, fight or flight, kind of self-explanatory. I was really excited when we talked about the last talk, bears eating people. I was like, great, I also have a bears eating people image. So yeah, like you have a tiger or bear chasing after you. This is the system that sends chemicals like cortisol, adrenaline, so on, that tense your muscles, you know, restricts your digestion, gets you ready to take some sort of explosive action. And the important thing there is that it's spontaneous, it's chemical. It's not something that like if you feel tense because of something this system is releasing, that is not because you are that person or you made a choice. It's just happening. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest is kind of the rhyme for that. You know, tiger's gone, I can digest my food normally, I can do other things than explosively run away. So yeah, we got fight, we got flight, and so then interestingly, probably most of you have seen something like this before. There's some other ones, I think like fawn and faint are also up there in the F's of survival, but freeze is the parasympathetic nervous system's way of saying, this is too overwhelming. I don't feel equipped to do anything with this tiger running at me. That's probably what I would do. And so, you know, it's also maybe somewhat darkly, like it's like the deer in headlights. It just sort of releases the pressure valve off of the whole situation and says, all right, we're just going to accept this now. But despite this being the darkest one, I think that's exactly what happens somewhat abstractly when you run into these really impassable problems. And once again, this is all like super dependent on your experience, your dispositions and other things you've got going on. But for now, let's just assume most factors are controlled, and even if we're in a good mood, anyone can run into a technical problem that just like tanks that situation. So anyway, this is kind of a freeze response, at least for me. I'll tell a little bit of my own story rather than generalizations, but yeah, where it's like, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know how to move forward, and I don't feel like giving up is an option, right? Like whether you're in school or you're in your job, you're like, so I'm just gonna sit here and I'm just gonna suffer until something happens. And then these are some other things that at least I've felt like related to the other Fs. So fight, interestingly, is kind of like, I can't stop until this thing is done. Like you're debugging the issue, you're working on something, and it's like, I literally cannot even watch TV, I can't go to bed, I can't do anything. I'm stuck until this thing is done, no matter how long it takes. To me, I would map that in myself as like a fight response. Oops. Well, anyways, let's go back. There we go. And then, yeah, flight is maybe the most common, like, you know, oh, this is just maybe not for me, this is really hard, I'm gonna release myself from the situation. Anyway, so my low-level issues, so instead of making generalizations, I'll put myself on blast. So when I started college, I had no experience in programming. I can tell more about that later, but I had no experience. It was a really hard road for me to like catch up, and I was in a really hard program. So what I felt a lot, and this is an exaggeration, oh, I should explain what this graph is. This is arbitrary output units over arbitrary time units. So like how much I learned, how many assignments I did, I don't know, and then time, like that could be my hour-to-hour situation, my month-to-month, I don't know. This is just a general representation of like, I would freeze and be like, what the hell is going on? I don't know what this is. And then, oh, that one PowerPoint slide out of like 100 is finally the one that doesn't seem like gibberish. And then it felt like, though, like the deer in headlights thing, like I was not in control of how much I was able to learn because it was so much and so confusing. It felt like learning sort of happened to me. And once again, this is an exaggeration. I'm not just sitting there like a freezing deer until like math hits me, I don't know. But that was kind of how it felt like, and it was really tough. And so then as I graduated, I was employed, got to work on like more specific projects and really like get specialized a bit. You'd think the anxiety would like go away, like, oh, I know what I'm doing, so everything's cool now. But it actually just expressed itself with a different F, with a fight kind of response. At least that's how I characterize it for myself. Where, you know, I get a task on my plate and I still felt the same level of like agitation, like this needs to be off my plate. So I'm going to do it as hard as I can, and kind of, that was that like, I can't stop thing. And once again, exaggeration. I wasn't this like hardcore rise and grind beast like every day, but a little more on that side than the other side. So yeah, you can see both of these graphs shapes, by the way, I wasn't like intending for this, but they seem pretty harsh, right? Like it's not like, oh, I'm just making progress day by day and living life. It's like everything's hard or everything's like scary or burned out or something like that. Like they're just almost like opposites of each other, right? But it's the same underlying feeling, at least what I characterize for myself. And so you might ask, because I'm holding you all captive here, so you have to ask that. You might ask, how did I find a better way? Why am I here talking about this stuff? And so this is a bit of the story time. Oh, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, okay. Yeah, okay, ponies. I've held you all captive to talk about ponies. No. So Yeah, so one of the hobbies that I've done for a while now is riding and working with horses. And I didn't do it that much as a kid or anything like that. I'm not one of those people who's like born into it. Just randomly decided I have disposable income. I will go do this thing I've been wanting to do for a while. And eventually I really enjoyed it. I got to the place where I could look at getting my own. I was working with a trainer and she said, sure, I'll go look at horses with you. And I thought, because I knew I wasn't like that experienced, I was like intermediate, that I was really being thorough to find the safest, best horse. Nothing will go wrong. This is just like my life dream. And so what it turned out, so this is Nova. I thought that like 4 or 5 was a good adult age, but it turns out that that's more of like if you've had an adolescent puppy who's like insane, that's like what that is for horses. Where it's like rebelliousness, but times like 1,000 pounds. And I also thought she's a quarter horse. That's kind of like a golden retriever family kind of horse. But I didn't realize when I looked at her papers later, she is the cattle sorting barrel racing kind of quarter horse. Not quite the like easy going kind. I think she had just done something wrong and looking really cute in this picture. So the point being that I was kind of in over my head. Before I go any further, I'll say this whole time, you can anticipate I had some troubles, but this whole time it wasn't an option for me to like rehome her, even though I wouldn't judge anyone who like feels they need to do that. But for me, it just wasn't an option because I bought her as this awesome safe horse. She probably had trauma from like past training too that wasn't so good. So I'm like, I can't give her back. I can't rehome her and watch her get passed around because I don't know, if I have the time, I have the funds, and I just need to change myself, then I'll work at it. So anyways, the point being that I didn't want to give her up, so that's kind of like with our fight, flight, freeze. I was like, for me, giving up wasn't an option. But I was, I was this person on the right graph, right? I was like I wouldn't have said, oh, I'm this like anxious, nervous wreck. I would have said, oh, I'm just super hardworking and like disciplined and I just like get shit done, right? But actually this is like a really inefficient way to do things in the end. But I would have just said, I'm super hardworking. And so I was like, sure, we'll figure this out. If I'm just diligent enough, this horse's issues will get figured out. And I guess I should mention some of her issues were, like rearing, like you're just leading her around. She'd rear straight up, balk at you, challenge you. There's something you do with horses called exercising them on a lunge line. So you're on the ground and they're kind of exercising around you. There were many times where I was skiing, sand skiing. It wasn't fun at all, but, and times where she bolted with me. And then one of those times I fell off, and another time she kicked me and broke my ribs. So very serious stuff. I spent 9 months being traumatized by this horse. Yeah, so it turned out that I've run through this talk so many times, and every time I get on some like weird horse tangent, so I'm stopping myself here. Yeah, so let's see, we're riding along, we're doing our thing, and yeah, so the point being that that previous style of just like, oh, if I just put together the right plan, if I'm just diligent enough, we'll figure this out. And I was always like, have you guys had in software where you're like 1 week away for about 3 months from finishing shit? So that's basically what this was to me. Like, oh, I'm just like, I'm almost there. If I just make one big push 40 times, I'll get there. And so it turns out that doesn't work with horses. It turns out that's what gets you kicked and dumped all the time. Because I wasn't listening very well to my own stress thresholds. She had no reason to trust me when she was already like at a very high stress threshold. And she was super dominant and didn't need a human to like help her with stuff. Anyway, so 9 months of this, I discover this book at the bottom there called EvidenceBased Horsemanship, and it's by Stephen Peters, who's neuroscientist type guy, and Martin Black, who's like a cowboy horse trainer type guy. And this book was great because there was no Stack Overflow for horses, and I'm being totally serious. I would because I'm so used to looking up stuff on the internet, I think I've exhausted every 2007 horseforum.com, my 5-year-old horse is crazy kind of search. And there's a lot, so basically what I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of resources out there, but kind of like learning an instrument, a lot of people communicate based off of feel and anecdotes. You know what I mean? If you've had a piano teacher, someone like that, who's just imagine your hand's a cloud, and it's that's not working for me. So this was great because it broke down what their brains are capable of and what exactly they're doing and why. And so an example of this is a lot of horse trainers will say things like, self-respect, you gotta teach your horse to respect you. Your horse doesn't respect you enough, and that's why you got kicked in the ribs. And what this book would say in response to that is horses do not have a frontal lobe large enough to process a concept of respect. Herd dynamics are a little bit more computer simulation rules than this concept of this, I don't know, human narrative of relationships and knowingness and so on. And so this really helped me start to break things down into whoa, my software engineering actually really applied here. And I found that I've worked with other horses. I find that they actually really appreciate someone who has a clear system to how they operate with them. They want clear, predictable inputs and outputs. If the human does this, this thing will happen every time in repetition, and that builds a lot more trust than if you're just sort of I don't know, just being mushy-gushy, but bringing all of your emotions there with no clear rule set of how to interact. And yeah, so getting to what this slide's actually getting at, this one line in the book blew my mind. It was bad behaviors in horses are not the horse playing a trick on you. They're not disrespect. They're spontaneous responses to stress and fear in their sympathetic nervous system. So that's what we talked about earlier. They have this, we have this. It's one of our most primal parts of our brain. And so here in this picture, you can see there's a horse. He's in a round pen of some kind. He has a Western saddle on, and he's bucking and rearing and running around. And most people would say, that looks like a bad horse behavior. That looks pretty scary. Someone go fix that horse. But when you start to view them as more of a system, there's no baby horse that's born ready to fuck with people, something happened there, some condition is there that's making them this way. So if you put your detective hat on, you put maybe more of that computer systems brain on, you start to ask more questions okay, is that his first time wearing a saddle? That's really reasonable. The first time a saddle goes on a horse for them to be what the hell is this? And maybe the saddle's pinching him. Maybe it doesn't fit. Maybe that round pen, he had a training session there that was really harsh and he doesn't want to be there and he's already anticipating it. But there's always a reason why they're this way. Otherwise, if you want to know what's the signal of a horse who's totally happy, they should just stand there and fall asleep if they're just left alone, right? And so I also realized in myself, oh, I also have that in my brain. And so when I beat myself up a bit for oh, I froze, I didn't handle this bad behavior, this situation correctly, I get nervous and so on, I realized, oh, that's something that's out of my control. That's a spontaneous chemical thing. It's you have your human brain up here that's sometimes arguing with your cellular body, right? And it's I need to just break things down so my cellular body never gets there and neither does hers. So this is the pattern that kind of emerged. So I would have a freeze response, right? Because even getting kicked and things like that was no small thing. I would drive there, already shaking in the car before I'm even there, right? So little things got me really nervous. And so I learned that all right, this is spontaneous, it's out of my control. No matter what I say or do, my body's gonna feel shaking and awful. So I'm gonna reroute this. And this is the pattern. If I were to define what it was, this is sort of the steps I took. So first, Gaining connection back to the thinking brain, like a ping, like even just saying, I am panicking right now. Okay, well, I'm thinking now, okay? And then gathering information. So, you know, this is a huge thing of even just asking, you know, I have my agenda for today. I'd like to work on riding my horse. Oh, but there's this tractor out there making a ton of noise, and it's already making me nervous to just like go from one gate to another because I'm worried about stuff, about bad behaviors. So it's like, okay, you know, maybe I'm aware of the tractor, so maybe then I decide the smallest thing I can solve right now is not going on a big ride and getting ready to get like bolted on again. It's doing like tractor desensitization, and I just have to, without judgment, give up on the fact that I'm not going to do what I wanted today. If we remember back, I was the person who was like, no, I will go until like 4 a.m. to finish the thing, right? And that was very, very hard to let go of, that like I had to make the progress that was actually available to me that day, not the progress I wish I could have made that day. And is there anything else there? Well, anyways, so the most important part though is that this wasn't just like a daily thing. This was a like moment to moment, every few minutes repeating this level of mindfulness, like not just committing to one thing and then like going, but like constantly readjusting myself, the plan, being aware of where my stress levels were at and not ignoring them, and same with her and the horse. And so what I really found was that if we isolate this even more, steps 2 and 3 are really important. That's like your domain knowledge, right? Like if we're going to map this back to like software stuff, but this would be like how to train a horse, how to debug programs, what are the tools you have available in your toolbox. And that's really important, but because have limited time, the main skill that I think is the first step before you can even get to your toolbox is getting over the mental hump by gaining that connection over and over and not losing it, and not just getting like swept away by the fear and the like, oh God, I can't do this kind of feeling. And so this is what like eventually you could call kind of a self-awareness or mindfulness. But the thing I want to highlight, I guess, is that sometimes I think, at least when I hear about mindfulness, I think about it exclusively as in like just this general mental health, this thing that you do supposedly during your lunch breaks and that'll fix all your corporate stress or something like that. But I'm also talking about mindfulness as something you do throughout your activities, not like you do to relax to then just go back to your old patterns. This is like how you can reprogram those patterns. So yeah, this is what, with these graphs again, this is ideally kind of the shape I like to go for now. So, you know, the reason why it's a little more organic, a little more flowing, there's breaks, but they're not too long or too stagnant. And it's because I'm frequently readjusting, like, what's my plan? What am I working on? And this is true for software as well, right? Like, I found that in that old version of me, I don't know how many of you have gone down like deep into a hole and you're like 30 files deep in some like system library, and then you're like, I should probably pop out of here. This is probably, I'm doing something wrong design-wise, right? Whereas this constant readjusting, you know, you're more likely to do the right thing. The challenge is, like I said earlier, the amount of progress you're making will feel very small. It'll almost feel too small, as if you didn't do enough today, especially, at least if you're like me and you're used to these like mega highs of like getting a ton done and like, oh yeah, got all that done. The more sustainable and actually more efficient and higher output way that I've found, I don't get quite that same like, oh, got so much done, so good. And sometimes those power sessions are totally valid, but I'm talking about myself and my chronic issues with power sessions. So yeah, going back to our like technical problem mental blocks, like reload that in your brain, whatever you struggle with. I found that after repeating this like hundreds of times, many hours, that like it really did leak out into everything, because I was reprogramming my relationship with that low level part of my brain. And so, yeah, describing some of those software things, coming out of the 30-file hole a little bit sooner. So I found that I could engage in this loop there as well. But this transition took a lot of practice. It wasn't even about, once again, the domain knowledge is super important. And if we had more time, there's like so much we could talk about there. But this transition, in fact, was so hard to practice, and I was so stubborn, and so like it was so hard to change that, as I said, I had to get like beaten up by a horse for like a year before I finally really integrated it. So I'm not underestimating that this is hard. And then this transition takes practice. So it's really like the first block to figuring out the technical problem can sometimes not just be like, do you have the technical information to solve it? It's like, can you make the transition from, man, this sucks, to like constantly readjusting? So some ways to practice this without large animals. The most direct way, probably somewhat obviously, is like meditation and breath work and yoga and things like that. It's a very direct way to like target these skills, but I feel like, I don't know, like I said, there's been like stuff with like, you know, getting emails from corporate things saying you should meditate during lunch and the pandemic will go away or something. So, or maybe you just don't see yourself really walking into a yoga class or something like that. Totally fair. So I'll do my best to describe a set of activities that maybe you can think of something that works for you. Basically anything that does body-brain coordination. I'll give an example of, I used to ride my bike a lot in the pre-horse days, but like 40, 50-mile bike rides. I'd go from like Redmond across the 520 all the way down across the other bridge and around, if you're familiar with Seattle. It was like way too much though. I did not actually have that fitness level. I was actually kind of like, you know, beating myself up. Wow, there's a theme. But the point being that like that is not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying you should go exercise. I am not saying you should challenge your stress thresholds or levels of discipline or something like that. The way I would ride my bike now is like, so that style of riding, because my right side is dominant, my right side is to this day still way overdeveloped from doing those rides, because like after many hours, I'm like leaning, I'm collapsing. So like my right shoulder and my right knee really like paid for that. So now when I ride my bike, I'm thinking like, am I balanced in the left and right side? Am I collapsed in my shoulders and so on? And I can't go longer than like 20 minutes before I'm like, man, this sucks. Like, this is so hard to think about how to be in the right posture. So that's sort of what I'm getting at, like something where you're gathering data on like, how do I feel when I'm trying to really think mindfully about my body to brain connection in this way? Maybe it's like you're not an artist, but you go to ceramics or something. I don't know. I'm sure you can pick something for you. Even better if it's something sort of random that you have no associations with, that you have no expectations of yourself for. And I don't know, just play with it. I don't have any other advice than that that's applicable to everyone. And then, yeah, so eventually, if you practice that stuff enough, you gather a lot of data, you're like working through your mental clutter, and eventually you're not going through those steps rigidly of like, okay, what's the smallest step forward? What's the next smallest step forward? Like, eventually, and for those who are experienced, you might be like, yeah, obviously, this is kind of like the steps I go through. Like, I don't know what to do, so immediately, like, your toolbar comes up in your brain. But what you really get at is, you know, I have no idea what's going on. I should probably read this SDK's documentation. And the real issue is I just really don't want to. I'd rather like poke at this on my own rather than read the material. I know that this person is like an expert and it would probably take 15 minutes. I just don't feel like calling someone on Zoom today. And it's like, it'll always be something so simple, but you find the real like sticking point there, and then you have an opportunity to like work through it from there. And then honestly, like so much of what my solutions have been just like, when you listen to your body, you realize like just how hungry you are or just how much you just need to go to bed. and everything magically works in the morning or something, right? And that's what I'm talking about with like, sometimes I can't intellectualize, you know, which chemicals are doing what, but I know that if I'm just like eating and sleeping properly, the chemicals will probably be working okay, right? Because all that fear and mental block is also very chemical. So yeah, in conclusion, we can have spontaneous stress responses, meaning they're out of our control, like we were talking about. It's just like chemicals. We can have those when working with technical problems from the safety of our own home, but it comes from, you know, defending ourselves, surviving, and so on. And the important thing to remember is that, like, there's no bad horses. I've never seen a bad egg of a horse. There's always a reason why. I'd encourage us to treat ourselves like that. Like, there's probably a detective reason why we feel that way. And then there's lots of ways we can approach this, but today I hope you just take away that mindfulness is a skill that can help us with those transitions from mental block towards progress. So identifying, like, this is making me stressed right now, I want to quit, and then trying to reroute in the smallest way possible towards progress. So back to that, like, you know, you did your first Python course, you want to make a game from scratch. You know, it all starts by being like, okay, I'm already so confused at C programming. Maybe I got to drop making a game. Maybe I got to drop making a game from scratch. Maybe I just focus on this like little C tutorial for a second. And same thing all the way up to more advanced folks. There's always like the smallest step you could take. And hopefully you feel like you can make sustainable progress and work through those mental blocks. So that's all I got. Thanks.